Hey everyone, it's Gina from Orchid and Opal. I am back today with a brand new tutorial. This is for the Maritime Opulence bracelet that I just came up with to go with the brand new earrings by the same name. These of course come from the new beadway boxes available at Eureka Crystal Beads. I'll have those linked right down below the video, as well as the full list of materials you'll need to make this bracelet if you want to make one right along with me. This blue colorway, it's called Overboard, and today I'll be making the bracelet with the black and gold color scheme. That one is called Yacht Luxe. There's also a pink and bronze variety I put together with Eureka, and that is called Sunset Glam. So you can choose any one of those 3 beadway boxes, again, at their site, and it will contain enough beads for you to make one of these bracelets to go along with the matching earrings if you've already made those. I'll leave the link to the earring tutorial down below as well. And as you can see, what we'll be using today are 5 different styles of beads. I've got some Toho Japanese seed beads in size 15-0 and 11-0. Also a tube of their size 8-0 Demi rounds, and 2 varieties of 2-hole beads, the Dropduos and the 2-hole bar beads. So if you have any of those already in your stash, feel free to have fun with those and get creative with your own colors. And to get started, we'll be trimming off a segment of some 6-pound Fireline. Of course, you can use any beading thread that is comparable to that you prefer. And I recommend a size 11 beading needle. Once you do that, we're going to start with this larger component on the bracelet. This pattern, as you can see, of course, repeats. And so once you get started, you'll just keep repeating the same steps, alternating between a larger component and one of those little components to connect everything together. The bracelet that I'm making today is going to come to a little over 7 inches in length, but of course you can make this segment as long or as short as you want and have fun with making your own clasp or adding one from your finding stash. All right, well, that's enough of that. Right now, you can go ahead and trim your thread and thread your beading needle, gather up your materials, and we will jump into this tutorial. All right, everyone, to get started, we want to pick up one of the Dropduos going through the wider portion there at the bottom. Follow that up with 2 of your Demi rounds. Another Dropduo going through that more narrow side. Then you'll pick up a Demi, a 15-0, another Demi round, a bar, 11-0, bar, 11-0, and 1 more bar bead. Let's go ahead and string down what we have so far. And you can see I'm not using a stop bead. What I recommend is leaving about 1 foot of thread on this side that you can use at the end to finish up the other side of your bracelet. At least that's what I'm going to do with this example when I show you how to weave in the clasp. So just leave yourself enough thread to use to finish up that other side. And we can keep adding some more beads to make this larger round component. So after our 3rd bar bead, let's pick up a Demi, a 15-0, a Demi, another Dropduo going through the narrow side. Now 2 Demis. We'll string these down. Now we need a Dropduo going through the wide portion. And this is where we're just going to make the segment symmetrical and keep going by adding on another 2 Demis, Dropduo through the narrow portion, Demi, 15-0, and Demi. Grab some more bar beads. Got 1 of those on, followed by an 11-0, bar, 11-0, bar, Demi, 15-0, and Demi. You can see I'm already just kind of starting to form this shape into a rough loop before I even sew through it all, just to keep myself straight and see what it is that I need to add. So now we need another Dropduo going through the narrow portion. And we'll follow that up with 2 more Demi rounds. At that point, we can go ahead and turn this beadwork into a loop. And if you'd like to see all the beads in sequence, this is what it looks like in a straight line. Again, leave yourself about a foot to work with at the end of your bracelet. And as you pull these beads together, making a loop, take your working thread side with your needle and just sew through all of those beads again one more time. Make sure you don't miss any, especially those little tiny 15-ohs. And just go through a few beads at a time. Start to pull that together. And I'm going to continue on through that original Dropduo as well. So just a little bit past where you started. And don't worry about positioning those beads just right yet. This will all come together. But I do want to turn these so you can have a better understanding of what this is going to look like. That's how the setup looks for this component before we've even gone around the central section. And before we do that, I'm going to make 1 half hitch knot right next to the Dropduo that we're coming out of. So I'm going underneath the thread bridge, making a loop, and I'm going to take my needle and sew through the loop and make a little knot. You can pull on your tail thread just like that. It doesn't have to be terribly tight, but it's enough to keep this together without using a stop bead. And I'm going to continue on by sewing through the next 2 demis and the next Dropduo that we get to. We can step up through the wider portion of the same Dropduo at that point. And that's my working thread there coming out of the Dropduo. You can see now we're set up to start beading around that inside portion and bring these beads together using those other holes, especially on the 2 hole beads. Right here, what we want to do is pick up a 15-oh, a demi, and a 15-oh. Don't worry about that tail thread. I'm going to then take my needle and go through the wider portion of the next Dropduo that we get to. I'll hold that with my finger there in place on the bead mat. And there's our beads going in there. After that, we'll pick up another demi and then sew directly through those next 3 bar beads all together. You won't be putting anything in between those. Then we're ready for another demi, going through our next Dropduo, that wider portion at the bottom. And then let's make this symmetrical. So we need a 15-oh, a demi, and a 15-oh. Let's go through that Dropduo. Then a demi, and sew through the next 3 bar beads. And we need 1 more demi, and we'll sew through our next Dropduo. And at this point, you'll continue sewing around that inside ring of beads to reinforce that area and continue bringing this all together. So just go through a few beads at a time and pull this together. And this time you do want to start to pull it together nice and tight. Again, don't miss any of those 15-oh seed beads. Just take your time. Sewing through, you can see how it's just starting to come together and tighten up a bit the more that we go around and reinforce it. So make sure you go around at least 1 time fully and then a little bit more to complete a loop. And I'm going to keep going since I have the tail thread on this side. I'm going to go just a little bit past the central drop duo on this side. Hold that tight. I feel like the center is pretty reinforced. And now we can go up through the drop duo that we were coming out of, go through that narrow portion and pull, and then sew through the next 2 demis, and so on, going through all the beads on this outer portion of your beaded component. Once again, take your time, go through all the beads little by little. Holding that with your thumb and your forefinger so they stay together. Pull tight. And here you can take your needle and step up through that central drop duo, going through the narrow end, just like that. So that is one of those larger components complete. And what we can do is continue sewing now, making one of the smaller links in this chain, we'll call it, which will continue pulling all this together. So once you're coming out of the narrow portion of this drop duo, you can pick up a 15-0, 3 demis, a 15-0, and the narrow portion of another drop duo. It's going to sit kind of like that. Make that symmetrical, pick up a 15-0, 3 demis, and a 15-0, and sew through the narrow portion of the drop duo. All right, so we've got our beads in place for that smaller component. Let's go ahead and sew through the next 15-0 and 1 demi, pull, skip that demi that's in the middle, and sew through the next one and the 15-0 and the drop duo. Pull tight. You can see by doing that, that creates a peak down there at the bottom. It's going to get that central demi round to stick out just like that. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So continue sewing through the 15-0 and 1 demi. Skip the next demi round, sew through the next demi and 15-0. Pull tight, and voila. So at this point, what we can do is continue sewing through the next 15-0 demi, skip the next demi, of course, and then go through the next demi and 15-0, as well as the next drop duo. Pull tight, and then go through the open hole of the same drop duo, going through that wider portion. That's where we end up, right in place to start our next larger component. So you'll just keep doing this all the way down your piece as long as you want to make your bracelet. Also, by the way, that would make a really cool earring, just like that. Sort of another take on the Maritime Opulence earrings that I showed you in the other video. And right now I'm just going to add one more larger component to this so you can see how it all comes together now that we've got a segment like this in place. So once again, all we need to do is pick up some more of our beads. We're going to pick up 2 demis, a drop duo going through the narrow portion, demi, 15-0 and demi, bar, 11-0, bar, 11-0, and bar, Demi, 15-0 and Demi, Dropduo through the narrow portion, 2 Demis, another Dropduo, this time through the wider portion, two Demis, another Dropduo, narrow portion, Demi, 15-0, Demi, moving on to our bar beads. $11.0 bar, $11.0, one more bar bead, Demi, 15-0 and Demi, go through a Dropduo, that narrow portion, 2 more Demis, slide all that down, make sure you have everything on there just how you want it. And then just like we did before, you're going to sew around all of those beads one more time. So I'm going to go through the Dropduo, that same hole on the wider section, picking that up and just holding these loosely together with my thumb and my forefinger as I take my time and go through all of these beads one at a time, making another loop to match that first one. Just like we did before, go down through the next 2 Demis and the next Dropduo, and then step up going through the hole on the wider portion of the same Dropduo to get to that intersection of holes. And just like we did before, you're going to string on 15-0, Demi, and 15-0. So through the next Dropduo, turn this around so it's a little bit easier for me to work with. Pick up a Demi, sew through the next 3 bar beads, Demi and Dropduo, 15-0, Demi, 15-0, a Demi, go through those next 3 bar beads, Demi, and we're back where we started, going through that Dropduo, the wider portion, and I'm going to sew around that till we get up to the Dropduo that's just a little bit past the center point. Going through that one, pulling tight, and then turn around and sew through the hole on the narrow side of the Dropduo. Followed by the next 2 Demis. And it's totally up to you if you want to reinforce that outer loop of beads once again, or you can continue to the section where we'll make another smaller component. At that point, you'll just sew down through the narrow portion of that next Dropduo and you're in place to do that. So that is really all there is to this, to the main beadwork. And what you can do is just back up the video if you need to refresh yourself on how to keep going and make that component. And in the end, I made about 5 of the larger components. You can see I ended with 2 of the smaller ones, and it's kind of loose on my wrist, but it's also not too tight, which is great. What I recommend you do now is just keep going with your beadwork and make as many of those larger components as you want. And at that point, we're going to meet back. I'm going to show you how you can finish up one end of your bracelet so that way you can do the other one as well. And also, you might get to the point where you need to add some more thread to work with. Of course, if you're making this, you probably already know how to do that, so I'm not going to show you that process, but I think you get the idea. So keep going until you have the length of the bracelet how you want it. At that point, I will meet you right back and I'll show you how to finish up your bracelet. And welcome back, everyone. Hope things are going well with your bracelet. At this point, I'll show you how to attach one end of a toggle clasp. It's just a pretty standard example of one right here. And I'll use the loop portion. And what I did was I put a needle on my tail thread. It's coming out of that Dropduo down there. And what we can do is just sew through the narrow portion. And I'm going to make one more of the little small links before I add the toggle clasp loop. So we already did that before. That was 1/15, 3 demis, a 15-0, and then we'll go through the narrow side of a Dropduo. Then our 15-0, 3 demis, and a 15-0, sewing through that original Dropduo, doing what we did before to get that central demi to stick out, just skipping that one as we go around the bracelet, going through that next 15-0, demi, skip the next one, and then back through the Dropduo, pulling that tight. And then we want to get to the other end of our beadwork there, coming back out of that Dropduo. So continue sewing through the beads, pull tight, and then sew down through the wider portion of that Dropduo on the end. So at this point, this is just an example of how you can finish up this bracelet. Of course, you can do this in many different ways, but I'll do what I did for the example piece, and that was by first picking up an 11-0, and then 2 of the 15-0s and 1 more 11-0. And with those on your needle, you can go ahead and sew through the same Dropduo again, get those beads into place, and then sew through the 11-0 and through the next 2 15-0s. I'm going to hold that with my fingers and pull tight. And we're done with everything except our 15-0s and the clasp. At this point, I'll pick up 2 of the 15-0s and sew up through those original 2. This time, sew through the next 1 15-0, pick up a new one, and sew through the next 15-0 there. Sew through those 2 15-0s below again, and then sew through the next 2 15-0s that you get to, coming out that one that is sitting right there like a little peak. And then I'm going to pick up 3 15-0s, sew through one side of a toggle clasp, pick up 3 15-0s, and then sew through that same 15-0 that's in the center there. You can see that brings this toggle clasp to the beadwork. And then what we want to do is just reinforce everything. So I'm going through those 15-0s again, the 3, going through the loop of the clasp, sewing through the next 3 15-0s, through the central one again, and then just continue reinforcing that as much as you want. I'm going down through that next 15-0, sewing through the next 2. I'll go down through the 11-0. We'll make a half hitch knot right there, going underneath the thread bridge next to the 11-0, making a loop, sewing through it and pulling. Sew through these beads once again. And I'll make another half hitch knot right there. Go through the 11-0. Through the Dropduo. Again, pulling everything tight. And you can just go ahead and sew through more of your beads to reinforce your bracelet as much as you want. Everyone has their own style when it comes to tension and how tight you pull everything. So if you want to make anything tighter, this is the time to do it. And make as many little half hitch knots as you want. And once you're done with that, you can go through a few more beads. And just trim off your excess thread. So you'll do the exact same thing on the other side of your bracelet to weave in the other portion of your toggle clasp. And at that point, your bracelet is complete and we'll admire our beautiful work. All right, everyone, so here is the finished bracelet. I hope you enjoyed this project and had lots of fun beading along with me. It was great to have you. As always, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. I always love to hear from you, especially if you decided to make one of these bracelets. I'd love to hear about it. Don't forget to get your materials at Eureka Crystal Beads. Everything is found in the new Maritime Opulence beadway boxes in 3 different colors. There's the other 2 colorways right there. And once again, I'll have everything linked right down below the video, as well as the link to those boxes directly. That wraps it up for today's video though. Don't forget to give the video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Also subscribe to my channel while you're here, and stay tuned for more upcoming projects. Until then though, I wish you all lots of peace and love wherever you are, and as always, happy beading.